Hello everyone, welcome to TAM Lab 91. Today we're going to be discussing the VMware Certified Advanced Professional certification, and today I've got with me Frank, who's a staff architect, Tina Krogull, who's my partner in crime, and myself, a senior TAM in the UK. So what we actually wanted to do today was I've got a small agenda. Obviously, this won't be death by PowerPoint today. It's going to be just an open discussion about our experiences with our advanced certification. Frank or Tina, would you like to go first, please? Would you like to introduce yourself and where you are on your certification journey?
Tina Krogull. I'm based in Germany. I'm technical account manager now for a little bit over than 18 months with VMware. And I've set the VCP exam last year, and because of talks with some of the colleagues, also with Frank, I'm looking into taking the VCAP exam. But so far, I've only actually looked at it. So I'm keen on learning from James and Frank today what it takes to pass the VCAP and what it will be like to prepare myself to make sure that I pass it, and that I'm on the right way to do so. So I'm picking up from James, who has experience with it, and from Frank, who is part of the team coming up with these I heard kind of challenging questions.
Thanks, Tina. So my name is James King. I've been with VMware for 3 years, multiple VCPs, but I've only actually sat one VCAP exam. I've actually failed one and sat one. So, I'm still early on in my journey, but I just wanted to share my experiences more around my failure, really. I think I learned more from the failure than the pass on this occasion. Frank?
Yeah, my name is Frank Escaros-Buechsel. I work as a staff consulting architect with our telco group. I started collecting VMware certificates basically in 2013. I got bored at a certain stage and just set them all. At this stage, I would say, I don't need to say, I would say I just checked. I have about 49 badges in the acclaim, all just from VMware alone. So I'd say I am kind of a veteran taking our exams and writing questions for them as well.
Excellent.
Quick question from my side, Frank. If you have 49 badges, how many more are still to go? Or is that the 49, is that the top number?
No, there's definitely more, because you don't only get badges for passing an exam. There is badges for being double certified, for example. So if you have 2 VCPs, and depending on which 2 VCPs you have, there is a badge for that. Then there is badges for VCDX as well, which I don't have. And then through becoming an exam SME, you have different levels. So for each exam that you contribute content to, you get a certain number of points, and depending on the amounts of overall points you have accumulated over time, you also get badges in certain tier levels there as well. So there's still a bit room for improvement there.
Great stuff. Thanks, Frank. So what is the VCAP? So obviously, as we know, advanced professional level of exams, and VMware define it as being for administrators, architects, and engineers. And as you can see there, it's an advanced level certification for people who design and build VMware solutions. But one thing that I wanted to discuss today is obviously, I think it's fair to say there's a bit of a kind of myth in the industry that, it's a really, really tough exam, which it is, but similar to any VMware exam, VMware do their absolute best to help you to pass. So in a similar way that you get a blueprint for your VCP exams, there's a blueprint for the VCAP exams. And in that blueprint, VMware are basically telling you everything that you need to know to pass that exam. So as I say, I failed my first VCAP. And the reason that I failed it was because similar to many people at VMware, several VCPs over the years, but the level and style of questioning in the VCAP really caught me off guard. I sat the 6.5 design exam, and I just really wasn't prepared enough. I didn't look closely enough at the VCAP, and I wrongly went in with the assumption that it would be very similar to a VCP, which I think is a classic error. Because obviously the VCP is all aimed at hands-on. It's just one exam, but then once you get to the VCAP level, it splits off to design and deploy, which cover completely different subjects and topics. I don't suppose you've got any comments on that one, Frank?
I do. So as you said, right, when I started to collect these in 2013, in the Cork Center, we had exactly one person who was VCAP certified, and everybody was absolutely terrified of that exam, and put that person on a pedestal, right? And then I started sitting these and realized, yes, they're challenging, but they're not hard per se. There's no trick questions in them that make them hard. It's more, the advanced really stands for, we are testing for advanced feature set, not necessarily for advanced knowledge. And once we've started giving some training sessions in Cork around that and how you approach those exams, there should be over 30 or 40 VCAPs by now. Just within the last couple of years, we brought out an unofficial training curriculum that I've sent to you as well, right? Which helped a lot of the engineers to just get over that initial fear of the exam, because once you know how to approach it, it becomes a lot easier. It becomes a lot relaxing. I would also argue that for most roles, the deployment exam is the vastly easier exam than the design exam, because I think you said you were caught out by the style of questions and how the questions are written.
Yep.
And to me, that is less trainable than a performance-based exam, right? And a performance-based exam, which the deployment exam is, and for those who don't know the difference, the design exam is a multiple choice exam. So you get a question and a number of answers, and if you don't know, you can just guess and still have a fairly decent chance, right? But you really need to understand what the intention of the question writer is. In a performance-based exam, you're actually performing the tasks. So you have a question. How you solve that question is completely up to you, though, right? So the only goal you need to achieve here is the desired end configuration that the question writer had in mind, and not necessarily their language or some weird qualifiers, and we try to get rid of these questions as most exams, like choose the best answer. That is a very difficult question to answer, right? But in a deployment-based exam, it's really straightforward. Once you understand how you configure the storage, how you configure the networking, how you configure all these advanced features, the deployment exam is rather straightforward, actually. That would be my recommendation.
No, thank you, Frank. And, I think one of my recommendations would certainly be to, when you're looking at which VCAP to sit, and because obviously we've got 5 tracks, which we'll just skim over briefly in the next few slides, but it definitely helps if you're working with the technologies. I think that's kind of a universal truth. Obviously, if you're going to go and try and sit an advanced VRA exam, and you've barely touched the product, then obviously you're going to really struggle. So it does help. I've got a home lab in my garage, but if you're not so fortunate, the VMware hands-on labs actually cover a vast majority of topics, advanced level topics. And obviously that's something that you can speak to your TAM about, because TAMs can actually facilitate labs being created and speak to the teams that look after the labs. So it's just another tool that you can use to assist you on your journey. But I think hands-on experience, to Frank's point, it is key, especially the deploy exam. I mean, you're not really going to have a great chance of passing the deploy exam if you're not using these products daily. And I think that's also another key area which I failed in, which was that I became an architect and I didn't get hands-on enough. As you move away, step back, start to draw things rather than press the buttons. That kind of worked against me. But then obviously I went back to my lab and rectified that mistake. So if we look at the VCAPs that are on offer, so there are 5 tracks VMware would say, where we have the advanced level. So DCV, data center virtualization, is probably by far the most popular route. It's kind of the core for a lot of VMware employees too, I'd say, vSphere and all that kind of good stuff. We've also got a track on cloud management and automation. And as you can see, so all of this information is publicly available. So VMware will say, it's aimed at the administrator, architect, engineer level. They'll say, here's the courses that ideally you should have been on to give you the best possible chance of getting a pass. And basically, this is the key. VMware pump out absolutely tons of information to help you to pass this, because they want you to pass these exams, and they'll guide you. So when you click on any one of these exams, it'd say on the VMware webpage, ideally you should have sat these courses. These courses are optional, but they might help. So they're always looking for ways to kind of give you that insight and guidance. We've also got the network virtualization track. And one thing you'll notice is that with the VCAPs, and we'll touch on this later, we always go for the design and deploy model. So we split those two out just because they're two distinct areas, two distinct kind of job functions, really. More likely be your architects doing the design and more likely be your engineers doing the deploy. But we'll touch on what happens if you pass both, because our Frank has done that. Digital workspace, obviously a massive area for VMware as well. All around Workspace ONE and Horizon. And application management. So as we get closer to developers, as we look to build our portfolio and things like Tanzu, obviously our certification tracks follow, because one of the key things about VMware is when we deploy these technologies and release them to the general public, we aim to build an education foundation that supports you and your teams to actually operate and run these environments successfully, because obviously we recognize that your success is directly tied to our success. So just in terms of tips, yeah, go on, T.
Before we go on for the tips for success and knowing what to do to best prepare, just a few numbers so you get an understanding. VMware Learning just published last year and also a few days ago the latest numbers. So we currently have in EMEA a little bit more than 110,000 VCPs. If we then go on to the VCAPs, we only have a bit over 5,000. So I think this is all related to the myth that you were referring to earlier, James, that it seems like the VCAP exam, you can't make it, or it's very, very intense to prepare yourself and do it. So we just have to get working on it. And as I said before, I'm still looking into taking the VCAP. And I think some of the attendees currently are either have done the VCAP or planning to do it. So if you have any questions, or if you have your own experience so far in preparing yourself, please feel free to use the Q&A and the chat. And we're happy to answer, because we want to understand for ourselves too, why does it take so few people to actually go for the VCAP? Thanks, James.
No, that's great. Does anybody have any questions for us at this stage? So, tips for success, and I've also put a knowing when to call it a day, because I know, Frank, you've got some great advice on actually when you come to sit these exams. So just really quickly, as I say, we split the VCAPs out into design and deploy. You can actually sit the design from home remotely, which is what I did through Pearson VUE. So that's, I don't know if anybody's done that before, but it's quite an easy process. You just show your camera around the room, show that you've got no notes on the walls and all this kind of good stuff, and it's easily done. Sadly, the deploy, you do need to go to a physical testing center, which obviously hasn't been possible for a lot of us during these troublesome times. And I've had to cancel my deploy twice because the testing center's closed. But But with regards to the deploy, so when you actually sit a deploy exam, the reason that you can't sit those from home is that a full lab environment gets spun up in the background to facilitate your deploy exam, because it's all about doing. So, Frank, I don't suppose you'd mind telling us a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, sure. So I think just in general, tips for success is twofold, right? Once, as you mentioned before, James, you need to be familiar with the technology you're testing for. You should know what is actually in scope of an exam, what is out of scope for an exam, right? Let's just take the CMA, for example. Even though it's called cloud management, not all cloud management technologies are actually present, right? You won't find a VIO in there. You will not find a VCD in there. This exam is really geared more towards VRA than any of our other cloud management technologies, right? The same is true for the DCV track. The current DCV track is very much still in line with the old DCV track. So even though VCR 7 now has Tanzu as a possibility for you to license, configure, etc., the exams will not be covering Tanzu, and they will not be covering Kubernetes, right? So that is something that from a pure studying perspective may still be very relevant for your customer, but it is something that from an exam perspective, you can completely ignore without the risk of losing any sort of points in these exams. And that's very important. The best help there really is the blueprint. The blueprint states which technologies, and by now I think we've aligned all the blueprints to also state the exact version, because that is kind of important for certain tracks, especially where technology changes on a monthly basis. If you take EOC, for example, certain technology components have a very quick release cycle, right? So if you take a look at how long it actually takes to create such an exam, it will never be on the latest version for certain technologies. So it's important to understand the differences as well, right? I think the second and probably even more important tip is general exam strategy. This has nothing to do with technology, but how do I actually approach an exam? Because an exam is always time-bound. And whenever I talk to people who failed, especially the deployment VCAP, the typical answer I get is, I ran out of time. You don't run out of time, you prioritize wrong. That's the main issue. And once we start talking more and dig deeper into it, it turns out 95% of the people who said, I ran out of time, spent an hour on a task, on a single task out of a 17-task exam, right? So not all tasks are being weighted equally, but you roughly get between 1 and 5 points per task. Now, if you spend an hour out of your 2.5 hours time on a single task, you're not gaining 50% or 40% of the points on that task. So it's strategically a really, really bad choice to do so. If you cannot answer something, move on in the deployment exams. The tasks are not interdependent on each other. So if you can't solve something, note it down and then on to the next task, right? I think if you calculate it out on the deployment exam, on average, you get between 8 to 10 minutes per task of exam time. And even though I can't talk about the exact questions, that also very much means that you can't put a lot of stuff into 8 to 10 minutes, right? So for those who've never set these exams and have a lot of respect for them, really take a look at the hands-on labs, because you will see that we break down our hands-on labs into kind of like 15, 20, 30-minute chunks, right? The overall lab might be 8 hours in total, but for you to be able to to do this during a lunch break or just during short study time, we typically break them into those time windows. And you will get a fair idea of how much configuration the hands-on lab actually does allow you to do within that 15-minute window, right? And also what's the difference between what has the lab planned for in these 15 minutes and how much quicker am I actually? Because you will find that most of the time, the planned time is about 2 to 3 times as much as you would require when you already know what the task is and how you achieve that without reading all the instructions, etc. Right? So by that, you can kind of gauge what a 8-minute configuration in an exam really looks like. It is not a lot of configuration you can actually expect a candidate to do in about 8 to 10 minutes.
And Frank, with the deploy exam being lab-based, if I've got issues with my lab, I should approach the proctor.
Yes.
But I believe you've got some advice with regards to when to actually call it a day.
Yeah.
It can happen.
So as soon as possible, right? Once you notice that something seems off, and it's not always easy to tell. Certain tasks will involve troubleshooting steps, right? Sometimes we have actually intentionally broken something. But if you do notice that, for example, a host is not working and that host is referred to in several tasks, and you're expected to perform configuration changes on those hosts in several tasks, something is not right. As I said, the items do not interdepend on each other, right? And rather than spending your time to try and fix that host, it's not going to gain you any points. Immediately call the proctor over. They can pause the exam counter, right? They can approach the appropriate support team, and they can add time that it takes to either fix the underlying issue in the exam lab, or what might also happen is to get you a reset, right? But you don't want to waste 3 hours, out of which 2 hours is trying to fix something that is obviously broken, and then still get the same result of getting to go home and getting a reset anyway because the lab was broken, right? The interdependency between the tasks is usually the best tell for those kind of broken stuff items. To be fair, though, we have completely revamped on where the exams are being hosted as well. The older exams are on an older infrastructure. The newer exams are slowly moving towards the hands-on labs infrastructure as well. So just to answer that live question, you might see this happen more on the older exams. The newer exams should be a lot more, shall we say, stable, right? There's always the possibility that something on the initial setup script didn't work correctly. But I would argue, especially since I've seen them since the 4.x days by now, both from a performance perspective, which was a big complaint in the past, as well as from a pure stability perspective, the newer exams should be a lot better.
And just on that point, obviously, a lot of the vSphere 7 exams and other technologies, a lot of the exams are being updated at the moment to the latest versions. So it's definitely worth checking, because another issue that I've found is that I started on the 6.x track, and obviously the 7.x tracks come out. So I was a bit indecisive as to which one I should do, but I decided to stay with the 6.x track. So I plan to sit the 6.7 deploy, purely just because that's where the bulk of my knowledge lies. So to give me the best possible chance. And yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thanks, Frank. So in terms of passing your VCAP, what's next? So we work with a company called Acclaim, who create these badges that you can see on your screen now. They're really great for sharing with their colleagues or putting on your LinkedIn or Twitter just to recognize your achievement, because obviously it's a big achievement to pass any of our advanced level exams. And a little known fact, which I actually didn't know about until a couple of years ago, was that if you pass both the design and the deploy, you can actually qualify for a VCIX, which is a badge, not a certification. Frank, I don't know if you'd like to talk a bit more about that as our VCIX owner.
Yeah, so the VCIX really is just a designation to show that you have achieved both the design as well as the deployment exam in a given track. From a next step perspective, the VCIX is the actual requirement for the design expert, so for the VCDX, right? So you would need to have both of these exams under your belt if you really wanted to go that route down for the VCDX as well.
So as you can see here, so VMware a while back switched to a year designation just to indicate when you pass that exam. So correct me if I'm wrong, Frank, but I believe if I gain both my VCAPs, become a VCIX, going forwards, I only have to actually pass either VCAP in the future to renew my VCIX.
One of them. Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. Renew is also I think a bit of a weird word. So you update the year on it, but technically VCAPs never expired, right? They were always valid. And we've also removed the expiration of the VCPs. However, you will only be able to sit a VCAP for which a VCP is a requirement if you're within, I think it's 2 years, 1 or 2 years of the same. So you could sit a 2020 advanced deploy with a 2019 VCP, but not with a 2018 VCP. So while the certificates technically don't expire anymore, there's still some dependency on having an up-to-date VCP to be able to sit the VCAPs actually.
And that was actually something that I fell foul of myself, actually, because I had a 6.5 VCP, sat the 6.5 design VCAP, but it wasn't recognised. And it turned out to be that my VCP was 2.5 years old. So I then had to go back and sit the 6.7 VCP. So yeah, something to be aware of. And just in terms of the VCDX, the design expert, so there's currently, Tina mentioned the numbers earlier, but there's a tiny amount of VCDXs in the world. I think for DCV, we're not yet up to 300 in the world. But obviously one of the benefits of gaining something like that is that, you know, it's very exclusive. It's very well respected in the industry, and you are assigned a number. So I've got a number of friends who are, you know, VCDX 291 or whatever, and it's a really well recognized certification in the industry. It's kind of like our absolute premier, and something that we hope Frank will be tackling at some stage
when the time, yeah.
yeah, when he gets a moment. Brilliant.
So we just have the current numbers released. So it's interesting. There's only one VCDX worldwide who holds all 4 certifications. We have 6 worldwide who hold 3 of the 4 certifications, and at least 42 who have 2 VCDX certifications. So James, as you mentioned, I think we're still under 300 worldwide. So if you go this far, you are amazing. Definitely.
Absolutely. So does anybody have any questions for us? Anything at all? Ask away. It's our pleasure.
There's one question in the Q&A where one of the attendees asked, are we expecting to have vSphere 7 design workshop as an on-demand course to help us better preparation, to have better preparation material? I'm not quite sure if we can answer this question here. This is probably something where education or VMware Learning is able to answer. Or Frank, do you have any input on this one?
No, roadmap needs to be discussed by VMware Education for the course planning. However, The same is true for the design VCAP as it is for the deployment VCAP. So the design VCAP will also not include the Kubernetes and Tanzu stuff from vSphere 7. So while you're looking for a course that might just not be there as an on-demand yet, the 6.7 based course would basically cover about 90 to 95% of the technology, right? What you then want to additionally look into is things that changed in 7, like lifecycle manager. No, right? The possibility to have whole cluster images is new, and there is some changes on vSAN that would be in scope of this exam. But the main course really for 6.7 would cover a lot of what is required to still be able to pass the exam. And I think that's also a very good point. None of these exams has a 100% passing score, right? So you do not need to answer everything correctly on the exam to actually pass. We can't disclose the exact passing scores because they are different for each exam, and you get a scaled point system, right? So our point system works in a way that you have between 100 points and 500 points. 500 points, you get all the questions correct. 100 points, you have nothing answered correctly. The passing score is 300. And that is for every single exam. However, for one exam that might be answer half of the questions correctly, for another exam that might be answer 80% of the questions correctly, where that 300 demarcation line is, right? So you should be able to say to most of the questions, yes, I'm fairly confident in that response, right? That's what you want. But even if you can't answer a single task or a single question, from a general strategy perspective for taking exams, do not worry about it. Move on. Mark it, right? And move on. Initially, your gut feeling has a higher probability of being correct than thinking about a multiple choice question for 10 minutes. Just from a statistical perspective, it's better to just guess on it then and move on, right? Still mark it if you have time left in the end and you want to spend 10 minutes thinking about it. But if you have to spend 10 minutes thinking, chances are you're still guessing anyway.
So Frank, you're saying if your gut knows more about the topic, listen to it, go for it, and don't try to think it through. Because what I've seen with for myself is if I start to think about what could be, I usually go the wrong way. So if I take the answer that I checked first after reading it, it's without spending too much time thinking about it. But if you start to think about, you will go off a different route, and you probably end up the wrong way.
Yeah. Again, those exams are time bound, right? And if you have to spend a lot of time thinking on a single question, you're not doing yourself a favor. And since you don't obviously know the answer immediately, right, you may be able to figure it out from a thought process perspective. But from a pure strategy perspective, since for most questions, especially if it's 1 out of 4, you have a 25% guess chance anyway, right? It's simply better to pick and move on and be able to answer the potential other 60 questions as well, right? Than to ponder a very long time at the beginning of an exam about what you would personally find to be a hard question, right? And everybody has those hard questions, right? They're different for each person because everybody has different strengths and weaknesses, right? Make an initial guess so that you have that 25% chance of a correct answer on a 1 out of 4, right? Mark the question so that if you have time left over, because the rest of the exam plays to your strength, then you can still spend that thinking time, right? But do not make the thinking time a front-loaded strategy. That's where people just lose points unnecessarily in those exams. we wanted to share one more thing because it's relevant for the customers,
Yes.
James, the current discount options. The VCAPs, so if you work for VMware, you do get a certain allowance, right, to take exams for free. And if you talk to your manager, they can actually let you expense exams over that allowance. However, if you're on the partner or customer side, right, that is a $400 plus tax exam converted to local currency. So they are not exactly the cheapest exams, right, which is why preparation is also key. You don't want to fail a $400 exams multiple times in a row if you can avoid it. Ideally, you want to pass first try. But especially since we know that budget is tight currently in the current global situation, if you have customers who want to take these, then I would encourage you to make utmost use of the programs we have around it. We do have discount codes, we do have discount offers. They rotate on a somewhat regular basis as well. So it might be just worthwhile seeing, especially around VMworld, we also typically do a lot of exam discount codes. So if you have a customer who's wanting to sit those exams, usually around VMworld is a really, really good time to save some money as well, right?
And just one final thing from me, sorry, is just to encourage any customers that may be watching this video just to reach out to your TAM. So virtually every TAM is at least VCP certified, if not VCAP or above. And we love to hear about you and your educational journeys. Also, please do reach out to us if there are any offers, places where you can find free training and things like this. So although VMworld is a kind of chargeable event, we still release an absolute ton of free content, which you just need a My VMworld account, which is completely free. And exam prep is usually on a number of videos. So I can see Tina's posted the video there. But yeah, please do reach out to your TAM to look for this assistance.
And just again, for some expectation setting, maybe if you look at VMworld sessions for your design exam, if the session's already a 200 or 300, it's probably much, much more detail than you would actually need for the exam. If you want to prepare for new features, for example, watch the level 100, what is new track of that VMworld session. That's probably going to be the best content from a time perspective to consume, to be able to answer the level of questions on the exam. Again, they're not supposed to be super hard exams. They're supposed for testing advanced feature sets, right?
Good. Thanks for the insights, Frank. I think some of the myths just disappeared, and hopefully we will have some more VCAPs by the end of the year. And James, I think with that we will close the session for today. And thank you again to all attendees for listening in, for watching, and hopefully you got some push to go for your VCAP. Thanks, everyone.